the Confronting the Rise in Racism, Stamp Out Islamophobia and Anti-Semitism National Conference. I'm Kate Herford, I'm a teacher in Haringey, and I'm going to be chairing this session today. We're in the session now on Europe and the renewed threat of the far right, so welcome to that. We are a broad campaign that welcomes refugees and stands up to all forms of racism. We believe in unity of Muslim, Jewish, Christian people, and of people of all faiths and none, together with trade unionists, parliamentarians, students, LGBT communities, and all anti-racists. Now more than ever, we need unity, especially given the announcements this week by the Tory government, which will clamp down on migrant rights and unleash reaction in the name of hard Brexit. Fascism is rising across Europe, and this session will look at how we can work together to challenge it. I'd just like to announce before we make a start that we do have a hashtag which you can tweet on, which is #StopRacism16. So please tweet your thoughts and feelings during this session on #StopRacism16. Our first speaker in this session is Petros Constantinou. He is a councillor based in Athens and coordinator of the movement against racism and the fascist threat, KEERFA. KEERFA is a campaign in solidarity with migrants and against the fascist Golden Dawn Party.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. I think it is very important to realize the danger and the fascist threat in Europe. I'll just give some numbers from 19 countries. Now they have 89 members in the European Parliament, and in the national elections they got 397 MPs, which belong to three groups of political parties. Neo-Nazis, very open fascist parties like the Golden Dawn in Greece and Jobbik in Hungary. Euro-fascist like the Front National in France and FPO in Austria, and the Euroscepticists like Judith here and in other countries. So they are there. But it is not only this picture of the elections. The terrible thing is that for the first time after the 30s, we have fascist murders in Europe, like Pavlos Fyssas in Greece, like Judy Cox in UK, and more others. We have pogroms. We have the revival of something that was terrible in the 30s, and people around were saying never again, but they're here. So we have to find a strategy and a tactic to fight against the rise of fascism, because really the danger comes because the European governments and the governments are building a fortress Europe full of fences. They play the card of racism and Islamophobia because on the same time they are intervening in the Middle East, in Afghanistan. They are making wars there, so they have to find an excuse, and Islamophobia is their excuse. They are also pushing for austerity measures, and they want to split the workers between the foreigners and the locals. So we live in a crisis. Now in Greece we are in the 8th year of a deepening crisis there. So they try to exploit the political crisis of the old parties, the neoliberals and the social democrats. They try to find their own way. So it is very crucial how we fight against neo-Nazism, fascism and the far right. I will make very brief two very brief remarks. People say, okay, the far right is not the same. They are the neo-Nazis who are the real danger, and they are the other parties who are not a real danger. This is dangerous. In Greece, before the Golden Dawn, we have a populist party, the People's Orthodox Party. This party opened the way for the Nazis, for two reasons. One reason is that when these parties appeared, they pulled the whole of the political system to the right, to xenophobia, to racism, Islamophobia, attacks against the women, homophobia, and so on. And the other thing is that always these parties, they are opening the way for the fascist parties. They have relations with them. Sometimes the neo-Nazis and all these extreme groups, they are part of this, or they're outside, but they're cooperating. So you can see that what happened with the AFD in Germany, their relations with Pegida. We had this in Greece, I talked before, with the People's Orthodox Party, that they opened the way. So for us, we have to have a strategy against them. Of course, it's not a common strategy. You don't face UKIP like you face the BNP in Britain or the Golden Dawn. You have different strategy. The first strategy against the Nazis is to stop them on the street, is to isolate them. You don't give them the space anywhere. So with the others, it is not really the same to have counter demos and so on. So it's very important to have a strategy. Of course, this strategy includes a more general approach. We have to fight against racism. We have to fight against Islamophobia. And for us in Greece, it's very important that we have the example of the neo-Nazis. It is one of the most extreme examples in the world, because the neo-Nazis of Golden Dawn, they didn't hide that they were Nazis. They didn't hide that they were a violent group. And in 2012, they tried, through an electoral campaign of real terror, stabbing refugees, attacking the left. They even attacked an MP of the Communist Party on TV. They did it in a very organized way. And when they were elected, they tried to build stormtroops on their electoral success. They attacked the neighborhoods. They murdered Pavlos Fyssas. They attacked the trade unionists. So it is very important now in Greece that through the action of the anti-fascist movement, and KEERFA is in the heart of this movement, that we had a strategy to stop them. On 2012, the polls showed that this party could get 20%, and it could close the road even for Syriza to rise on government. This didn't happen. It didn't happen because there was, after the murder of Pavlos Fyssas, of a musician, there was a general strike by the Public Workers Union and a march of 60,000 of demonstrators who marched to the headquarters of the Golden Dawn, saying, put them in prison. And for the first time, the government, they cracked down against the neo-Nazis. 68 of them are on trial. The whole of the parliamentary group was on trial of 2012. This trial is going on for 1 year and a half, and it is very important how you isolate the Nazis. From that period from 2012 to 2016, they have 7% with less votes. So their rise stopped there. It is still a danger. This is what we argue. Because now with the policy of the European Union against the refugees, with the closing of the borders, they try to go again on the street. They go to the islands, to Lesbos, to Chios and Creta, and they blame the refugees for the fall in tourism, for all the evils and so on. So there are demonstrations, there are fights, there is resistance against them, and it is very important for us to win this trial, to send them in prison, but also to build an alternative of workers, an alternative of hope, how we move on. In Greece we have a Syriza government, and it is very dangerous in this period because they try to appeal us on position, and it is important that we have workers' resistance against privatization, but it is also important that we build an independent anti-fascist movement that it is stopping them with unity, with all the political currents, with all the trade unions, and we are optimistic that we can defeat them definitely in the next period.
Thank you, Petros. Our next speaker is going to be Judith Benda. Judith is an executive member of Die Linke, the German Left Party, and also of the European Left Party, which is an umbrella group. She is also an active campaigner against racism. She set up School Without Racism, School with Courage, and co-founded Youth AG for Integration, Acceptance and Tolerance. Thank you, Judith.
Thanks. Thanks very much. I hope it's okay with the micro. I will use my input to give you some illustrations about the situation in Germany, because I don't want to repeat the figures about the European Union. What we see now in Germany is 1 year before the federal elections, we see that within society there is a broad polarization, we can say. Petros mentioned the Alternative for Germany, the party which was founded in 2013, which now actually gained representation in 10 out of 16 state parliaments. So it's really growing and it's really going fast. We see even in the last elections, they had more percentage, 21%, and this was more than the Merkel party, so more than the Chancellor's party. So they're really, really on the rise at the moment. They began, if we look back the last 2 years, they began with a clearly anti-European Union policies, anti-Euro, anti-European Union as such, as an organization, and now the last times they focused heavily, of course, on the migration issue, playing pseudospheres about the migrants. In Germany last year we had more or less 1 million refugees coming to the country, and this is of course their target. We have to note, however, that the AfD, this Alternative for Germany, hasn't suddenly brought racism to Germany, but of course before that we can also see an ongoing current of right-wing movements, of right-wing incidences. Maybe you've heard about the National Socialist Underground. It was an organization which is responsible for the murder of 10 people, and this is of course 10 migrant people between 2000 and 2007. So we see that before the AfD, of course, there were different movements. Pegida was mentioned. Pegida is on the street in Germany. We are on the street, but we have to admit that in Eastern Germany they are really big, and we can't really confront them. So far, our strategies don't really work. This is very sad, but it's like this. In 2015, we see in Germany 1,000 xenophobic acts of violence. For example, attacks on refugee houses or Islamophobic street harassment. So 1,000, and of course there's a figure which is much higher, but 1,000 have been registered. Luckily, and this is something positive, we see that people get on the street and that we can reach a mobilization. We founded something, a nationwide alliance, which is called, and this is nice, it's also Stand Up to Racism. So we founded this alliance, bringing together, and I think this is one very important strategic point, bringing together parties on the one hand, trade unions, Muslim organizations, so really a broad picture of society. And I want to come back what Petros said, that of course the right-wing people, right-wing forces in Europe, they use refugees, migrants, Muslim as scapegoats, and I think that we have to, exactly at this point, we have to resist, and we have to say it's not the refugees who are responsible, for example, for the housing shortage, for miserable wages. This is of course what we also see in Germany. You might not know this, but Germany has one of the biggest low-wage sectors in the European Union. And we have to underline that refugees are not the cause for our social and economic problems, and exactly it's on the contrary. Many of them are fleeing, Petros mentioned this, fleeing because of wars that we, the Western states, do, what NATO military interventions do, so of course there's a direct link. The reason why there is room for this racist and nationalist discourse is also, in my opinion, that since decades we had these neoliberal policies. We have this austerity policies, we have these very harsh neoliberal policies, and as I said, the country nowadays in Germany is as divided as it never was. We see every fourth worker in Germany is working in a low-wage sector, and we see that wage stagnation actually is the biggest in all European Union. So this economic and social factors have of course a very big influence. And having said this, I think that it's very important, and also maybe not so surprising, that there's a high potential in our society for frustration, for disappointment, and that people notice the parties don't differ that much. There's no distinction, and this is also, I think now, coming back to strategy, for me as a member of a left party, I think we need to have a clear profile, and we need to have a clear different approach compared to the other parties. And I think this is something we see. There's a big coalition, and you don't really see the difference. So this would be one other thing to mention. Maybe the last point, what's important for socialists, of course, to underline is that there is always a connection between neoliberal policies and the development of right-wing forces and racism. So I think if we want to stop racism, we always have to pose the question of the system. We always have to pose or fight against capitalism, because we know that the capitalist society, a small ruling class controls the wealth produced by the rest, and of course racism has a strategic tool in this game. So the fight against racism has to be linked with a fight against the system, and this is something which is striking. We have to put forward as left forces a social offenses, and this would be one strategic answer also to the question how to confront the right with social offenses, with social initiatives, because the right wing, they say they portray or they represent the small people, the ordinary people, but that's not what they do. They really belong to the neoliberal class.
Speaker is going to be Claude Moraes, MEP. Claude is a Labour member of the European Parliament for London and Deputy Leader of the European Parliamentary Labour Party. He is Chair of the European Parliament Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs Committee, and he also has a long background in refugee organisations. Thank you, Claude.
Thank you very much. And Judith mentioned in the middle of what she said, and isn't it, when we're leaving the European Union, listening to young politicians like Judith talking in their second language, isn't it a bit refreshing to hear this political analysis in a second language? How many British people could go to Germany and talk and give an analysis like that in their second language? Sorry to be so trivial at the beginning, but you know, thank you for that. Also, she mentioned in the middle of her speech something positive. Let me just begin with something positive, because very often in the debate on the far right it is relentlessly negative. We saw this week two very important victories for civic organisations, anti-racist organisations and people in the grassroots, and there were two extremely important blows for civic organisations, one against Orban in Hungary and one against Kaczynski, against the abortion law in Poland, and against Orban on the referendum. 45% of people turned out on the anti-refugee referendum in Hungary. People simply did not want to turn out on a referendum on which billions were spent, probably the most aggressive, racist, high-spending referendum that we have ever seen in the West per capita. Yet people just didn't turn out, and this was not because people just didn't like to turn out for a referendum. It's because civic organisations were engaged, and those civic grassroots organisations want to link up with like-minded people across Europe. Yes, we still are in Europe. You know, we haven't like broken off and got into the Channel and, you know, whatever Donald Trump wants to say about it, we haven't done that yet. And they want to link up with people politically. And the same in Poland. Women, first of all, stood up against a restrictive abortion law. They were told that there was no way in the Visegrad countries, in Poland, that this right-wing march is ever going to be stopped. And yet, that abortion law is now dead. And it's dead simply because of grassroots and civil rights and civil liberties organisations in that country. But crucially, they got support right across the European Union. And it was killed at the last minute because of that internationalist support. So let's be very clear that these victories do not stop Hungary being a virtual anti-democracy within a so-called European Union of values, but it does mean that you can strike a blow for democracy. Secondly, as Judith said, there is no question that we now have a crisis. We have virtually all centre-right governments now either being propped up or deeply influenced by far-right parties. This movement began a long time ago, but it's now reached an apex. It's reached a situation where even if there is a centre-right government, and again I take the position of Hungary, And I take the position of Hungary because Hungary has influenced exactly what has happened, and I've heard Petros many times, and we worked with him. It has influenced the position on migrants in Greece, it's influenced the position on Brexit in this country, it's influenced worldwide politics, and that's why I give it as the example. But the situation in Hungary was of a centre-right party, because remember, in Hungary it is not the far-right who are in power, even though you may think it is. It is a so-called centre-right party influenced by Jobbik, a neo-Nazi party, and this model is repeated all over Europe. And yes, we have those ingredients here today as well. So it is incredibly important that we understand, I'm finishing now, so it's incredibly important that we understand there are two ways of fighting it. Parliamentary democracy, but also civic engagement, grassroots struggle, and if Poland and Hungary don't give us that example, then nothing will. So we fight it both ways. It is winnable, and it has to be winnable, otherwise we will have a crisis in democracy. Thank you very much.
And our next speaker for this session will be David Rosenberg. David is chair of Cable Street 80, which commemorates the 80th anniversary of the battle against Mosley's Black Shirts. David is also the author of Battle of Cable Street, Jewish Responses to Fascism in the 1930s. He also organises the radical East End walks and is active in the Jewish Socialist group.
Yep. Thank you very much. Karl Marx famously said that history has a tendency to repeat itself. The first time as tragedy, the second time as farce. To be honest, I prefer Mark Twain's comment, where he said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And, we should not look for simple analogies. We should not simply read off the present from the past, but we can't help noticing the echoes and the similarities. And we can certainly draw on our understanding of what happened in the 1930s to inform strategies today. This week we marked the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Cable Street on 4th of October 1936. The really big commemorative event is tomorrow. Things went about 3/4 of the way back, but there's more here if people want them. But tomorrow we're assembling in 12 noon in Alto Valley Park and marching to Cable Street. And when we commemorate it every 5 years, which we've done since 1986, we revive the slogan used in Spain and in the East End that year, no pasarán, they shall not pass. Fascism was on the march right across Europe in 1936. But in Cable Street, it was beaten back, and beaten back by the united, direct and collective action of the people across the very lines the fascists wanted to divide them. On that day, in 1936, a beleaguered and impoverished Jewish immigrant community took to the streets with more allies than they imagined they had, and to repel an invasion by thousands of black-shirted, jack-booted fascists, animated by an aristocratic politician, Sir Oswald Mosley, who presented himself as the saviour of Britain's dispossessed. The posters announcing Mosley's invasion promised 4 marching columns, 4 great meetings. It was the 4th birthday of his movement, which had launched in October 1932. But originally, the East End was beyond Mosley's radar. It was only after a disastrous rally in Olympia in 1934, when, to the disgust of many of his wealthy backers, black-shirted stewards dealt extremely violently with hecklers inside the meeting, that Mosley then deigned to look to the East End to build a populist, working-class fascist movement. The same month that Mosley's movement came into being, in 1932, at the height of the economic depression, there was an East End churchman called Father Grosser, who called a conference on unemployment, and he described what unemployment meant to the people who are unemployed. He says, in addition to physical depression and ill health, there is evidence of frustration of personality, the loss of proper self-respect, the creation of an embittered and hopeless section of the community. And that's precisely the people who were ripe for recruitment by the fascists, who could offer them a renewed sense of identity and purpose. Mosley promised young people the chance to play their part for the nation in times of peace, not just in times of war. He described his party, a party of action based on youth that would mobilise energy, vitality and manhood to save and rebuild the nation. The late Tony Benn always identified the ingredients for social change as anger and hope. By the mid-1930s, Mosley's movement was the vehicle for anger and hope among a significant section of East End's impoverished and downtrodden workers, who lived close to a Jewish enclave inhabited by another set of struggling workers. But on that day, the Battle of Cable Street, they were shown they'd backed the wrong course. And that victory was cemented by a remarkable campaign that brought divided communities together through a common struggle around housing, and that really united anger and hope in pursuit of social justice for all. Today, housing presents itself again as one of the most challenging aspects of our lives, but the difficulties of building unified campaigns when so much housing stock is in private rented hands is a real problem. Anti-Semitism still rears its head, not in the largely fictitious charges made by the media against Corbyn, but in cemeteries daubed with swastikas, negative stereotyping and random attacks, particularly on Hasidic Jews. But we know, as a Jewish person I know, that it's other communities that are bearing the brunt of the physical attacks in an atmosphere of uncertainty and scapegoating. Modern racism is so flexible, it switches its targets instantly, can attack several targets at once, but we cannot fight it without fighting austerity too. Lastly, across Europe, the far right is growing in strength, and we've heard the different countries. And when we salute the bravery of people in the 30s, it's also a call to action in terms of campaigns now. But what I want to finish with is referring people to a brilliant article that Kevin Ovenden, a brilliant campaigner, has just written in Jewish Socialist, Europe's Far Right Under the Microscope. Because what he says is that, and he's done the whole movement of service here, is that we have to appreciate that far right movements are not the same. They have different forms, different dynamics, different contradictions. They share superficially a radical right-wing character, but some are neo-Nazis, some are Euro-fascists, some are national chauvinists, not fascists, and we have to find the appropriate tactics for dealing with each. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our speakers for an excellent lead-off. I'm now going to open this meeting up to the floor. If people who wish to make contributions or ask questions could raise their hands, maybe wave at me a little bit because there's lots of people in this room. I am going to be limiting people to 2 minutes to try and allow for as much discussion as possible, and I will let you know when that 2 minutes is up, so please try to be concise. And also just to warn people that this meeting is being filmed. If you do not wish to be filmed, please let Jenny here at the front know. Thank you. Yeah, the comrade there. Yeah.
I agree completely with David, and I suppose most of us do here, I'm also of Jewish background, that we are not the target at the moment. We are absolutely not. It is Muslims, it is refugees who are the main target. But I just want to focus for one moment on when Jews were the main victims of racism in Europe, and a symbol of that, which is the Kinder Transport statue in Liverpool Street, when actually, as a tiny concession to allowing some people in, we allowed some children in. And we're still congratulating ourselves on that. I'm not focusing on it because this Friday, at Liverpool Street Station, where the Kinder Transport statue is, we're calling an event which we can't really advertise on social media because they won't stop it. But it's by the Kinder Transport statue. We're asking people to bring suitcases or bags and to advertise the Dove's Amendment, which says, let the children in. Thank you.
This question, I think it's Judith. To what extent in Germany is the history of the 1930s and the rather dreadful outcome that sorry, okay, shall I stand up? I wanted to ask Judith, to what extent in Germany is the history of the 30s and the dreadful outcome of racism at that period used to fight today's racism, and how do political parties across the board in Germany react to turning their faces back to what was, arguably one of the worst episodes of European, if not world, history?
If I am missing you, please really wave at me, because I'm quite short and the room's really long.
I would like to say something about that, because I think it's not Germany. You can take the whole of Europe.
Yes.
The whole of Europe has got very strong extreme right movements. As you know, Hungary is fascist.
Yes.
Yeah, as a fascist government. So it's a fight that you have to carry on forever.
I'd like to encourage people, if you do have questions, to ask them. The speakers will have a very limited amount of time to sum up at the end, but they will be able to answer your questions.
I have a question, if possible. Do I have to stand up so people can see me?
If you could shout, that would be really helpful as well.
I'll stand.
Thank you.
Sorry. I'm Catherine Hatley, Socialist Workers' Party. I'm one of the people that do fundraising and leafleting. They organised a very interesting film by a film director that actually went... Can you hear me now? No? A bit louder? Oh goodness. I watched a very interesting film on the refugee crisis by an amazing film director. I didn't bring the information with me here today, but I can get back to people if they want. And it actually filmed how awful the situation is there for people and the xenophobic crimes that are committed against them. I can't go into too much detail, but if people are interested in the film, I'll get the information at home and I can forward it. But I would like perhaps the gentleman from Greece who wants to talk about it, if you know about the film and what's actually happening and how difficult it is for migrants and refugees there. And every day they're trying to get their papers done for to be accepted as refugees. They're not being given food, they're not being given water, they're sleeping in parks. Really difficult. Is that 2 minutes? Is that enough?
Yeah. Thank you. I'd like to encourage as many people as possible. The person waving at me back there, yeah?
I have a question to Judith, because I was reading that actually the voters, AFD voters, weren't just
Louder.
background, there was the middle class, quite well people, and that their fears were more of a cultural nature. So are political parties in Germany and left-wing political parties addressing this, and how? But it's all, I guess it's also the case in countries like the UK with UKIP voters, but I don't think about that.
Yeah, come right there.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think when you look across Europe, it is quite a scary picture as it's been outlined. But I think in terms of the racism which is in British society, obviously I think it is on the rise, both in digital politics and the rise in attacks recently. But I think the exception is that organised fascist groups are actually quite small, quite demoralised, quite not really growing in this period. And I think that's for a few reasons, and one of which is that we did have a united campaign of United Against Fascism and other groups against the BNP and against the EU. Every time they did take to the street, we confronted them. And I'm a socialist, but I don't mind if you're whatever political persuasion, as long as you want to fight fascism. These groups united people against them. I think the other thing as well is there is a danger in that the fascist groups being small, we're all competing about who's the more Nazi group. And the BNP used to come to your door with a suit on and say, no, we're not fascists, we just want to do this and that. And now most demonstrations you see everyone with swastikas, people coming in, trying to attack people and so on. So I think even though they are quite small, it's still a dangerous situation, and I think it just emphasises the fact that we do have to challenge them even when they're small and still get out on the streets against them.
Thank you. The comrade here.
Sorry, I don't know if I'd be able to shout. I'd like to say a big thank you for Petros. I lived in Greece from 2006 to 2008. I was not able to go out sometime from my home. I was hiding many times. Sorry if I cry. Petros' voice made me go out from my home many times. I put my shoes, and because he was shouting, refugees are welcome, immigrants are welcome, and they would pass out of my home and encourage me to go out. Thank you.
Candice Boomler, GP in Tower Hamlets. I'd like to thank all the speakers actually, because when I was brought up into politics in the 1970s, things were in a way very simple in terms of anti-racist politics. We had the National Front, which was a fascist right-wing organisation, and we did what we could to push them off the streets, to stop them marching, to deny them platform to speak anywhere. And I think a lot of us together of that generation, we did beat back the Nazi threat at that time. And I think what the speakers have drawn out today is that the situation is much more complex, it's much more nuanced. We have, a whole range of different right-wing parties that have a racist ideology, and indeed, during the Euro elections in this country, it was the case that both campaigns, the Remain campaign and the Leave campaign, were playing the racist card very high. Both Cameron on one side, UKIP on the other side and so on, they were playing that card very well. And what I feel really encouraging about today is that whatever side of that debate we were on, and I know looking around the room people were on different sides of that debate, we're here together in the room today to fight the sorts of racism. And we had what looked like, and probably wasn't at this point, a racist murder in Tower Hamlets where a Czech man was killed coming out of a fast food shop very close to where I work in my health centre, and we organised a very sensitive memorial sort of event outside that fast food to mourn his death. And we managed to get together John Biggs, who was the mayor of Tower Hamlets, our local MP Jim Fitzpatrick, and the Stand Up to Racism group some members of the Czech community were there as well. And they were saying that in their newspaper, in the Czech newspapers, that murder, which may well not have been a murder, a racist murder, was sending shockwaves through the Czech community, and it's right that we should stand up and protest against these things.
My name's Rosenberg, and I wanted to respond to my friend, the German friend who's sitting next to me, who I haven't actually met yet, but we'll talk afterwards. I wanted to relate really what happened back in 2008 in East London, where I stayed. We had to campaign against the British National Party, who at that time had a massive breakthrough in terms of achieving council seats all over Britain, and in particular in Barking in East London. And what we were confronted with every time we went round the streets and round the doorstep to try and persuade people not to vote for the Nazis was the argument, immigrants are taking our jobs and our homes. Now the reason I'm relating that is because it's important to recognise that in every single case where the fascists and the extreme right parties have made breakthroughs across Europe, it is by starting with real fears and real concerns among working people about the state of their society and the fact that they feel betrayed, they feel marginalised, they feel ignored by the politicians. And that's why Trump's popular as much as it's why Bernie Sanders is popular, as much as why Jeremy Corbyn's popular. People are angry and they want solutions. And the problem with, I don't agree by the way that the fascists were the politics of hope in the 1930s any more than the politics of hope now. They are the politics of despair. They are the politics of blaming, the politics of actually saying that the person who you think is lower down you on the ladder needs to be kicked. And that will make you feel better about your own marginalised position. And therefore everything that we are doing at the moment is really in many respects the same as what we were doing when we had to fight the fascists and defeat them and prevent them getting the seats again, as we very successfully did in Barking. Because the problem is the clothes have been stolen by the mainstream parties of the racists. If you look at what happened this week in the European Parliament, on the one hand, Nigel Farage was saying, Theresa May has stolen our politics. Look at the racist populism that she used at the centre of her conference speech. But at the same time, he was actually trying to intervene in the complete and utter ridiculous shambles that the UKIP are in themselves, falling in amongst themselves, because they didn't make that electoral breakthrough. Our job is to make sure that doesn't happen, and to make sure that racism does not become respectable mainstream politics in this country. And if we marginalise the right wing as far as we possibly can outside and across our communities, and that's why Stand Up to Racism Conference is so big today, that's why we have to deliver in the localities as well as nationally.
Just following on from that, there's a process that I've observed that there's been very little commentary on. In 1977-78, Mrs. Thatcher actively co-opted the National Front into the Tory party. And that's when a lot of, for instance, the 79 election, a lot of very right-wing MPs were elected by, for the Tory party. I'm seeing that happening again now, because that tended to undermine the National Front, because a lot of their support was pulled into the Tory party. And we're having it now, as you said. Theresa May is actively co-opting the UKIP into the Tory party. And, you know, it seems that this parallel that has been done before is going unnoticed.
I'm James Hoggett, I'm the youth officer for my local Labour Party, but what I wanted to say is that the fear of welcoming immigrants and refugees politicians' fear of losing votes isn't actually limited to national government, it's happening in local government. Our local district council, we came to them with a proposal to take 50 refugees, which is what, 20-25 houses. It's not a big ask, and the Tories were three-line-whipped into rejecting it, most likely because they were a fear of losing votes and because they didn't want to take any decent action. And when our council have been pushed, because since the EU referendum, we have seen a rise in reporting of racist attacks in our district. We went to them to say it's extremely hard on your website to see how to report racist attacks, and they weren't having any of it. They refused to cooperate, and they were extremely abrasive. And I think in order to fight this rhetoric, we need to also focus locally as well as nationally, because if we get enough grassroots support to take on councils who aren't stepping up to the mark in the refugee crisis for fear of losing votes or just because they don't have the political will to do it, then we will be able to be better placed to take on national governments in our fight against racism.
About we need to build locally, and a comrade from Germany spoke really early on about the fact that it's harder in the east to build up groups to actually fight Pegida than it is in other places. So we have got places which are actually a little bit unreachable for us. We have to be the anti-racists who reach the parts others can't get to. If you look at Britain, it might be relatively easy. In Norwich we have a quite good stand-up to racism group that's actually been quite successful. If you go to a place like Boston in Lincolnshire, which was a place where 56% of the population voted no in the referendum, where actually UKIP, those ideas are really strong, there isn't a stand-up to racism group in Lincoln or Spalding or Wisbech, all those places where we really need to have those arguments. If somebody had been there during the referendum saying it's not Romanian immigrants who are picking cabbages in your area that are the reason why you can't get your kid into a good school, it's because of Theresa May's austerity programme, that would have made a difference in that area in terms of the racism growing. And I think it doesn't matter whether we're in Greece, whether we're in Spalding, whether we're in anywhere in Europe, we have the same fight. And I think the thing about building in the localities is really important. We need to be an international movement, a European movement,
But in Britain, we need to be absolutely everywhere. And I think at the minute, as Jeremy Corbyn has begun to mobilise a lot more people in terms of actually fighting back against austerity and against racism or whatever, in places where we have not active groups, there will be people voting for Corbyn who will want to do something about racism. Hard though it is, we have to get there. And we have to set up, stand up to racism groups, groups that defend refugees, whatever it is, everywhere. There should be nowhere in this country where we are not fighting back.
I am originally from Iraq, and the Iraqi people now, like you see, they are normal people, but inside they are liberated for their country, who became part, and we lose many people. I don't know. And I will say that Middle East is a museum for Christianity, for Judaism, for Islam. Now they destroy, most of it destroyed, which is, sorry to say, this is for all the world. But what I learned, the person who is racist is actually inside his home or her home also racist. This is like a disease. When you hate somebody inside, you will like your brother more than your sister. That's after all this war. This is what I say to you. And for this I try, because I don't want to destroy Britain. I want Britain now is paradise comparing to the other world. So we have to keep that. We have to stay the good things which we have, because other countries, they have nothing. Even American, we didn't imagine how now they have a big division. This is a big country, China. So just keep for Britain. Britain is a nice place. And in spite of her problems we have. And I'm sure that if we change, the Middle East will change, all the world will follow us. All the world will follow us. So I'm right with the Corbyn, what he said about, it's a dream to make the world peaceful, but we can start about it. It's very difficult. And it's sorry to say that, but thank you very much.
This is quite an open question really, but I was just wondering, personally I'm not entirely sure that party politics are where things are really standing right now. If you look, for example, at the EU referendum, parties were divided. It didn't really, Labour supporters wanted to leave, and the Conservative Party was split almost down the middle. And I was just wondering on the opinions of others about really whether parties are the best way to be looking at this right now, because these opinions aren't segregated into groups. There will be, there are accusations, of course, not necessarily proven, of even anti-Semitism in the Labour Party on the left, but it's clearly there on the right. Racism is clearly there on the right, but I think we sometimes need to look a bit broader than just party kind of categories to fight this, and I was just wondering what other people thought about that.
This is going to have to be our last contribution before I bring the speakers back in to sum up.
Mike Killian, I'm a delegate from my unit in Manchester. What the last general election and referendum showed us is how ready the mainstream right-wing parties are to use racism to try and win votes in the current atmosphere. We've seen it again this week. Amber Rudd, the Home Secretary, her absolutely foul and spine-chilling suggestion that businesses will be forced by law to list the foreign workers they have employed, displacing British workers. Absolutely sickening, and appeal to the Tory, the most reactionary part of the Tory party. But at the same time, it also showed the strength and the weight, if you like, of anti-racism, because the next day she said, oh, well, it is such an idea, I don't get carried away. So we have a great strength in our movement. To deal with that sort of thing, we need to demand that the other parties, Labour Party, etc., unite with us to condemn those kind of statements, to force them to backtrack etc., and obviously not to bring it forward as legislation. But does it, you see, another speaker asked about, is this co-opting far-right parties? Well, I wouldn't think of it that way. Actually, this helps UKIP to actually legitimise and to spread from a mainstream platform the idea that some race of pleasure or other could be legitimate, helps UKIP to recover. You think people at work are at the moment taking great pleasure in the disintegration of UKIP, and we can all join in with that, literally falling out amongst themselves, literally coming to blows. But it's still it's a dangerous situation. UKIP came second in 120 of the 600 odd constituencies in Britain just a year and a bit ago. They could recover, and statements from mainstream parties and politicians like Amber Rudd can help that process. So we need different tactics for different formations that are prepared to use racism, as many of the speakers have said.
So firstly, I'd just like to talk about the importance of everyone in this room joining Stand Up to Racism. We also need the funds to keep going, so please set up a standing order. There are future events coming up, October 14th and 15th. We will be calling on the government to let refugee children in with a day of action and a demonstration. You can see the joining up form for more information about that. On Wednesday, October 19th, Stand Up to Racism and Diane Abbott, MP, will call a protest at the Home Office against legislation targeting migrant workers, students and communities. The Unite Against Fascism is doing a trip to Auschwitz on Thursday 3rd to Monday 7th of November. There are forms at the Unite Against Fascism stall for that if you want to go along. In November with MEND and MAB, Stand Up to Racism is organising Islamophobia Awareness Month with events around the country. Please contact the Stand Up to Racism office for more information about that. And on March the 18th, there is UN Anti-Racism Day demonstration supported by the TUC, and leaflets for that are available at the Stand Up to Racism. Basically, go to the stalls. I'd also like to point out, in case you didn't get a sheet, there is an appeal for support for KEERFA, the Greek Anti-Racist Anti-Fascist Coalition. If you haven't got one of these sheets, maybe see if you can get hold of Petros at some point during this day to offer your support. And very lastly, and I swear I'll shut up after this, for the Let the Children In demonstration, you'll be congregating near the Kinder Transport statue outside Liverpool Street Station on Friday 14th of October at 6 p.m. Okay, I'm going to bring the speakers just to sum up for 2 minutes now. Starting.
All right, 3 quick points. Just to clarify, I didn't mean fascism was a party of hope, it was a party of despair, but to the thousands and thousands it recruited in the 30s, it appeared as a party of hope and anger. Second thing, some points referred to the kind of the appeal of these parties, and I think we have to understand about the class nature of far-right parties. Certainly every far-right movement in Britain over the last 115 years, going back to the British Brothers League in 1901 through to the far-right groups today, has had at least 2 classes involved in it. The funders are coming from a business class and sometimes landed aristocracy. The foot soldiers on the ground are recruited amongst a layer of the working class whose natural interest is actually in left politics, not in far-right politics. And I think, you know, we have to, and I'll be very surprised if it's not the case in many far-right movements across Europe, that there's at least 2 classes involved. Thirdly, we've talked a lot about what we're fighting against. We need to also clarify what we are fighting for. And then we need to actually really push the argument for a multicultural society and be very clear and explicit and detailed about what that means. A society that welcomes immigrants and sees immigration as a good thing. And one of the great things about Jeremy Corbyn, and I was first on a platform with him at an anti-racist, anti-fascist demo in the mid-1980s, that's when I first met him, is that he's always pushed both those things. Both the what we're against, the racism and fascism, but also that really positive argument for a multicultural society.
very fast. I was very impressed by what you said, because the Amber Rudd listing, when the Danes tried to do, you remember the jewellery law, that if refugees had jewellery? What they call it in Denmark is a Nuremberg style law, is if you list people on the grounds of foreign nationality, or anything that is, that would be struck down in the courts, what you are doing is just beyond even our legal system. I mean, it would be struck down if organisations didn't, strike it down the way they did on the internet and so on. And for her to do it, and she was considered not to be right-wing, this is the completion of what the colleague here said in 1979. I remember we were immigrants from India at the time, the chilling Margaret Thatcher speech where she incorporated the National Front. The National Front lost support in London and elsewhere. This is the mainstreaming of the far right, the mainstreaming of right-wing politics. And that's why the gentleman at the front is right, that it's much more complex now. The far right have not gone away, but their message is mainstreamed. And if Jeremy Corbyn is saying, therefore, that in mainstream politics we have to tackle racism, then he is right to say that. And we have to do it from the mainstream, we have to do it in parliamentary democracy, we have to do it in the House of Commons, but we also have to do it in Europe. There's no excuse not to do it. We've got the internet now, we have other ways of doing it. And just to finish on this, because I know you want me to finish, I was on the border with Syria, I was in Lebanon last week, and what we heard here is that the migration crisis will not be over in months or even years, and even if Syria stabilises in a long time from now, you will always have migration from Africa, and there will be no excuse about European Union membership. This is the post-Brexit debate. People will start hating the other as an excuse, and the newspapers will do it even if political parties don't do it. So we have a big challenge on our hands, and it's right that you're here to deal with it in civil society as well as in the mainstream.
Maybe 3 points. First of all, the question on history and our experiences. Well, I think one important point which comes to my mind is, of course, that we need meetings with I checked the word because I didn't know in English. Contemporary witnesses. You talked about the trip to Auschwitz, for example. This is what the Linke, what the Left Party does. We organize meetings with, for example, Esther Bejerano. It's the only survivor of the girls' orchestra from Auschwitz. So I think this is very important. Education is important. So we have educational department in the party, and of course, anti-fascism is in the DNA of socialist parties of us. So of course, we always go on the streets the second Sunday, for example, in January, doing the commemoration for Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, where you're all invited to come to Berlin. It's a great experience. But this is the first thing. The second thing is regarding the AfD voters. I think we have to, I want to be clear that AfD was founded not by ordinary people, but it was founded by rich businessmen mostly. And the striking thing now is that, and this is very a problem for us as leftist parties, that most of workers and people with precarious employment vote right and not left. And I think this is a task which we have. What kind of words do we use? What kind of discourse and language in order to fight for these people? Because the people who voted AfD, it's not all racist people and not all, but they are lost. And I think it's the task of the left to get them back. And we see that. For example, what the AfD did is they succeeded in reaching the non-voters, and I think this is very, very important to get those people back. The last thing regarding parties and movements, I often like to quote a quote by the Spanish comrades. They say, 1 foot in parliament, 1,000 on the street, and this is actually what I try to do in Die Linke and what the left party does. I think that's the only way forward.
Yeah.
Okay, from our part, as a movement, we want to thank the refugees and the migrants who came in Greece and became part of the movement against the fascists. It was amazing. What happened in 2007 and 2008, women like the women here, thousands of them, they stood against the fascists and the Nazis. They even stood before the parties of the left and the trade unions realized that danger. The Pakistani community and all the communities, they were there. So every time that we had one attack against one refugee or migrant in one neighborhood, there were hundreds and thousands of demonstrating, neighborhood by neighborhood. And that's how we built our coalition, the movement against racism and fascism. And it was very important not to isolate these two fights, the fight against racism and the fight against fascism. Because the fascists, they were playing the card of racism when the governments and the European Union, they voted to close the borders, to open detention centers, to attack the asylum right. So that laws that were voted by the governments, they opened the space for the fascists. And I think that in our days that we discuss how to resist the fascists. That struggle in Greece in that period of 2008 and 2009, when the Nazis and the fascists were rising, it was very important for what happened last year in Greece. Last year in Greece, thousands supported refugees to enter the country and to open the borders on the north. This movement has a continuation. And the last thing that I want to say is that I'm very happy that Jeremy Corbyn is supporting the free movement. In Greece we have the experience of Syriza. We have a government change, we have the left on the government, unfortunately in coalition with the right-wing party, but this was not enough. You know, it was not enough because now we have detention centers in Greece, we have the Frontex, we have NATO, we have 40 camps for refugees outside the cities, and the last week, after 6 months of campaigning, the children of the refugees got in the school, but they got in separate classes. So we have to fight. Evening classes, and classes inside the camps. So for us, it's very important that the workers' movement go beyond, go for full rights for the refugees. We go for a society where everybody can be different without being afraid. This is our strategy, but we will win this strategy by defeating the right-wing parties like Theresa May and so on. We have to go on with workers' resistance and to go further for equal rights for refugees and the migrants in every country. This is the way to stop the fascists.